What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 52, and I am the host, Kyle Anzalone. Happy New Year's Day 2021 to everyone. I know a lot of people are happy to be exiting 2020. While it was a rough year in a way, it was a successful year for this show and, for me. And that's in part because I think the mainstream media and the US government, like never before, revealed themselves to be the enemy of the people. This is something that I have felt is true for a long time, especially because when I was paying attention to the mainstream media, they told lies that made me believe that going to war in Iraq was the right thing, and had me supporting what ended up killing a million Iraqi people. And I think the year 2020, even more exposing than that, and Russiagate and all the other lies that have been told, really exposed the cabal between the state and the mainstream media, and how they rob from us and lie to us to get us to go along with horrific policies that just benefit the well connected to the government. So my guess is that 2021 is going to be another, successful year for the show. I'm looking forward to everything that I'm, going to be talking about, all the guests I'm going to have on, and great things happening with this show. But at the same time, that likely means, more try at least attempt at state control and justifying it using the mainstream media to create this narrative that going to continue to combat on this show. I will say sometimes we have some success, and this first story I have here is a pretty good example of it. And this is from reason.com, and it's titled "When There Wasn't Enough Hand Sanitizer, Distilleries Stepped Up. Now They're Facing $14,000 Fine, FDA Fees." And that's the title, and it was written December 30th, 2020. Now, within 24 hours of this story coming out, and the first distilleries being notified that they would have to pay this $14,000 fee from the FDA, claiming that because they produce hand sanitizer, which was like a medical some kind of thing, you now had to pay this fee. The publicity on this was so bad that ended up having to reverse it, and so it was thanks to the great work of people like at Reason.com that this was exposed. But the FDA's plan, and this is no joke, was that all these distilleries, that when the COVID outbreak was first happening in March and everybody was freaking out and there was no Purell everywhere, and there were a lot of businesses and even like the school I was a part feeling like they had to have Purell. Well, distilleries stepped up, stopped making alcohol, which they sold, for a profit, and in a lot of cases started making hand sanitizers. There are apparently more than 800 distilleries did this, and in a lot of cases they didn't even sell it; they just donated. Now it probably generated them some good publicity and everything like that, because this was, after all, the worst global pandemic crisis that we had ever faced, and this is what a lot of people felt like at the time. And so these people made those decisions not thinking, oh boy, I may incur a $14,000 fine at the end of a year that is already going to be tough. This was a big hit. A lot of these distilleries draw a lot of money on tourism and stuff like that, and so the COVID pandemic was already going to harm them, and but they decided to do this anyways because it was a way that they could help out the community. Now apparently the FDA even imposed restrictions on the hand sanitizer that they were making that made it harder to come out and make more expensive. I guess they said that the hand sanitizer couldn't be drinkable, which, I mean, if you smell some of this stuff, it smelled pretty much like vodka anyways. But taking it through this extra step is something only the government. It wasn't even like a WHO mandate, I believe. It was just something that the U.S. government pushed. And so, yeah, punishment for doing, good things here. This is, how the government's reacted. Now, it looked so bad. This was such an overstep. They had to go back on it and had to make, take some steps back, and they're not going to impose this fine. But, in reality, if the government's been looking to like give people tax breaks or give people money, hell, the people that give away the hand sanitizer are the people that deserved it. And yes, they're the people targeted with the fines. The next story I have here is two more cops involved in Breonna Taylor's death received termination letters. And again, this is a bad news, kind of good news thing where two more murderous cops are off the street. So that's good. But overall, this was I think, a pretty disappointing outcome to the killing of Breonna Taylor, which of course happened in March. And really, she didn't even become a household name till over the summer after the death of George Floyd. Part of the George Floyd protest, Black Lives Matter movement, anti police brutality movement, whatever you want to call it. Part of, the say her name, Breonna Taylor was a lot of time the one they were talking about. Um, Rand Paul went as far as to introduce the Breonna Taylor Act, which would had eliminated the no-knock raids that were used, to kill Breonna Taylor here. So what happened? Just a little refresher on the case is that police in the middle of the night kicked down her door as a part of a drug investigation. So it shouldn't even be a crime anyway. Don't need to kick down a door, especially not in the middle of the night. Her boyfriend fired at the police, believing they were trying to break into the home. Police responded by just wildly firing into the apartment. Probably could have retreated and, started flashing the sirens and stuff outside and just had them surrender. But, crazy police in a shootout, this is what they do, just fire blindly into a target. I think they say about 62 shots into the apartment. 6 of them end up hitting Breonna Taylor, including one by Miles Cosgrove. This is one of the officers that has been fired, and is believed by the FBI that he fired the shot that actually killed Breonna Taylor. He's not facing murder charges, but at least he's facing some. There's another police officer, I believe his name is John Hankison. He was fired back in, I believe, June, over the summer, and he was the one that put together this raid. The other police officer that has been fired, James Jason, maybe is his last name. Anyways, he's the officer that lied on the affidavit that ends up being used in the warrant to be able to carry out this night raid on Miss Taylor's apartment. So you have police murdering an innocent woman. They face some minor charges, but not charges for actually killing Breonna Taylor. And it is, just a real, travesty of justice that in a year when the Black Lives Matter protest, maybe after the COVID virus is like the number one story, you still can't convict a cop for killing somebody, even when they show up, at her door in the middle of the night and start shooting randomly. The next story I have is also from Reason, and this is on the killing of Tamir Rice. This is one that goes back to 2014, and at the time, it was really revealing to me as to what the police could get away with. Now, police shoot somebody who's, in the act of committing even a non-violent crime. That, anytime you could like charge the person that the police killed, it didn't surprise me that they got away with it. But in this case, you had 12-year-old boys sitting on the side of the road. Police show up and within seconds of being on the scene, fire a bullet and kill this young man. The video is shocking. Anybody could go and watch it. And then to top it all off, when the young boy's 2 years older, so she's, I believe, 14 years old, his sister comes running in, seeing her brother just got killed. The police run and tackle her and are far more concerned about, arresting her than providing any kind of aid to this boy they just murdered. Um, I guess you would hope at least that, like, if an accident like this happened, the police officer's first concern would be like, oh my God, I just shot a child. Hopefully I could save this kid's life so I don't live the rest of my life a child murderer. But that didn't seem to be a concern at all. So that's who these cops were. They didn't face justice at the time, and we now know that there will be no federal charges in this from this case. Now, it's interesting to talk about it now just because it spans the 6-year period, which of course means that this went through Obama's Justice Department and the Trump Justice Department, and neither one decided to, prosecute. And part of the reason why is because they have this ridiculous standard in the courts and in our justice system for cops, which is basically that unless a cop is like, I'm going to kill this boy for absolutely no reason and then shoots him, they could claim that, oh, it was a mistake or an accident or they got scared, something like that. They shot him, and that's just how police are allowed to act. So, not surprising that we don't get justice for, Tamir Rice or Breonna Taylor. Just, interesting that we had this right at the end of the year where, this police abuse issue was so, highlighted and everything like that. All right. This next story we have here is just another absurd one, and I'm guessing that we're going to be dealing with this throughout 2021. It's from Axios. Scoop: Trump administration declassifies unconfirmed intel on China bounties. What this story is claiming is that there is going to be a disclosure of unconfirmed intelligence that claims China paid bounties to non-state actors in Afghanistan to target U.S. soldiers. This is very similar to, the similarly unconfirmed intelligence about Russia having offered bounties to the Taliban to kill U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Now, this one is even more absurd than the Russia one, I think. And that is in part because Axios is reporting a vague rumor here. They say that, I believe, two unnamed officials tell them that on December 17th, Trump was verbally briefed on the matter by U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, and they have now decided to declassify this unconfirmed intelligence. They're not saying what the intelligence is, what the source of the intelligence is, or who China is alleged to have paid, or how much even, to target U.S. soldiers or when. So this is nothing. This is a vague rumor. And now, the top headlines are that there's a report that China paid non-state actors in Afghanistan to target U.S. troops. This is, I'm going to guess, ring more true for just the average people because, they still believe that this claim that Russia was doing this was true because, the mainstream media is just so irresponsible in how they act, where they will, spend all this time reporting this story, and anybody who doubts it gets called out. But yet 3 months after it's known that the NSA doesn't even back this claim that comes from their own intelligence, and that was only from the Afghan government that likely tortured it out of some poor Afghan. Tammy Duckworth is still tweeting out every day, Trump still hasn't done anything about U.S. troops being targeted in Afghanistan by Russia. It's completely untrue. Nobody, demands why this senator is saying something false or a lie. But that's the state that we're in here, where they're able to report again something that's essentially a vague rumor here. There's really not even enough information here to seriously figure out how to debunk the report, because it's just there's some source that says this unconfirmed thing. Fantastic. I don't understand why Axios would bother to report this. And you could, unless it is to create the narrative, which you could even see in their story here. They have this section, why it matters. If this intelligence were to be confirmed, it would present dramatic shifts for China and sharply escalate tensions between the US and China. If the intelligence does not prove accurate, it raises questions about the motivation behind the sources, as well as the decision to declassify it. But also, it should raise some, concerns on the behalf of Axios as to why they would, believe and report this if it's, there's nothing to make it seem like it's true at all. Scott Horn has talked about on his show. He's a the host of the Scott Horton Show, editorial director at antiwar.com, how he exchanged emails with Charlie Savage. And I forget if it was about the Russia story or not, but it was about one of these things where the New York Times was essentially just reporting a rumor of unconfirmed intelligence making a claim. And his response to Scott was that, he's just reporting that people are saying it. He's not reporting that it's true. But these people in the New York Times have to know that when they report something as being said by U.S. officials, they're essentially telling people to believe that it's true. All right. So that's what I have on this story. Like I said, I don't want to talk about throughout 2021, but I'm guessing there's going to be some senator either tweeting that Donald Trump hasn't responded to this after 30 days, or that Joe Biden hasn't done this after 60 days. He must be owned by Russia. Those are China. That's going to be their ridiculous claims. The next story I have is from Reuters. U.S. warships transit Taiwan Strait, China denounces as provocation. Now, I mean, China, it did say that this is a provocation, but it's clearly a provocation. If China was sailing 2 guided missile destroyers off the coast of California, I think it would be fair to call that a provocation. Now, had the U.S. done it off the Taiwan Strait, off China's coast just days before, then, there's retaliation, everything like that. But, this is a very provocative move. Reuters doesn't need to put that in the scare quotes, but, they want to make it sound like that's like a fringe position to think that this is provocative. One of the reasons it is so provocative is the complicated relationship between mainland China and Taiwan and the United States, which says that we support a one China policy, yet we sell the government of Taiwan, which is in opposition to the government in Beijing, millions and millions of dollars in weapons. We give them security guarantees, and we sail our warships through the Taiwan Strait, trying to, I guess, assert their independence from China. So, this is a real messy situation. There's a very good article at Responsible Statecraft by Chaz Freeman, where he goes through and explains that, look, there's really nothing that the U.S. could do. Anything that we're saying that we're going to defend Taiwan is an empty threat. The U.S. would need to just spend a huge amount of resources to try to defend Taiwan, and there's really no practical way to do it. It seems that this is more my analysis here, but it seems to me that if the U.S. was serious about trying to defend Taiwan, that would eventually end up in a nuclear war. And so that this is the dangers of sailing these warships through the Taiwan Strait, is we're either backing a policy that could very easily lead to nuclear war, or we're just provoking the Chinese government to believe it needs more of a military power to take back Taiwan, if that's something that's going to actually try to do. All right, the next story I have here is from antiwar.com by Dave DeCamp. He's been on the show a couple times. I will have him on again soon. This one titled Trump administration considers placing Cuba, on terror lists. And so this is the state-sponsored terrorism list. It involves heavy sanctions from the U.S. government. I think it bans any kind of aid going to those countries. There's some other rules around what it means to be on the state-sponsored terror list. Right now, there are 3 countries on that list: Iran, North Korea, and Syria. I mean, it's pretty crazy to have those 3 countries particularly on the list, as Iran has really focused on fighting the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria since 2014. North Korea, I don't see really any proof that they're supporting terrorists. I think they end up on the list just kind of out of George Bush hysteria. And then Syria, which of course has been trying to take back its country from Al Qaeda and ISIS, for several years. Sudan was recently removed from the list, which was appropriate. At a time, it may have been pretty fair to say that Sudan was a state sponsor of terror. Osama bin Laden lived there for a while, but at this point, the longtime ruler of that country, Bashir, had been overthrown. Now, Sudan was actually only removed from the list, not anything to do with the fact that there wasn't a government in the country that supported terrorists anymore, but rather because they agreed to normalize relations with Israel and pay out a multi-hundred million dollar settlement to some U.S. families who were victims of the previous government's support for terrorism. So that's kind of what's going on with the state sponsor terror list. The Cuba edition would, I guess, be to make it harder for the Biden administration um, to move forward with normalizing relations or getting back to the Obama policy on Cuba. I mean, it may be that the Trump, government has done enough to kind of make the Cuban government less open to rapprochement. It's not like anybody is going to feel like Biden is a long-term president. It's not like he's going to be there for 8 years, maybe 4. You could feel like Kamala Harris is somebody who hasn't won an election. And so, maybe these countries don't see it worth normalizing relations with, uh, a Democratic Party because you're only a couple years away, likely from a Republican. And look, if you got Rand Paul, then maybe okay. But it's very possible that the next Republican president could be Tom Cotton. And look, he's going to undo pretty much any deal with Cuba or anyone that Biden gets done. So, I think that's going to be a real problem that the Biden administration is going to face. I also think there's like some hurdles and reports that you have to do to get off of the state sponsor terror list. Not that this couldn't easily be done by the Biden administration, but again, it could add some hurdles. And the U.S. government operates slowly anytime it's moving towards peace. So my guess would be that would kind of be the situation. We have to wait a little bit to get Cuba off of that list if they get on it. Another one by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. State Department approves $4.2 billion arms sale to Kuwait. The sale includes Apache helicopters and parts for the Patriot missiles. Patriot missiles are the missile defense systems, and that's apparently to the 0.2 in the $4.2 billion, $200 million there in Patriot missiles and $4 billion in Apaches. Not quite sure how many Apaches that is. But I'm sure that those helicopters will buy the Kuwaitis a lot of goodwill with the American arms makers who, fund the think tanks. And so, they'll buy the Kuwaitis some goodwill with the, top think tanks as well. And then, of course, politicians and stuff who are all funded by the military industrial complex as well. We have another big arms sale. This one, I think, a little bit more disgusting than the Kuwait one, even though it's not quite as much money. The Trump administration approves $290 million bomb sale to Saudi Arabia, again by Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. There are Boeing made precision guided bombs that they're selling to Saudi Arabia. These are the U.S. bombs in the past have been sold to Saudi Arabia, and they have dropped those bombs on funerals and school buses. So, if sell somebody a gun and they go and kill a child with it, if you sell them a second gun, then you're definitely complicit in that child murder. And so the next your main baby that gets blown up by a Saudi bomb, we knew what those bombs were going to do, and we kept selling them to Saudi Arabia anyways. This has been going on for 5 years, so it's another policy that extends both the Trump and the Obama presidency. For the first time this year, the UN has updated numbers in quite a while, and they're now saying close to 250,000 people have been killed by this conflict. I'll just go ahead and actually, I was going to wait on this Yemen news, but I'll get into the Yemen news that I have now. There was a recent blast at the airport in Aden. So when you have Yemen here, there's the Houthis who control the capital city of Yemen in the north, and then you have a Saudi-backed government that has long lived in exile in Saudi Arabia. that has controlled some of southern Yemen, including the city of Aden, which they named their second or replacement capital. Uh, Part of that Saudi government was arriving at the Aden airport when the airport was either hit with a bomb or missiles, potentially four missiles or some kind of bomb, and it kills 25 people. No members of that Saudi government were hit in the attack. There are reports that later the cabinet was moved, that Saudi backed government was moved to a palace, and that a missile struck near to the palace. The Saudis claim that the Houthis were behind this attack. The Houthis haven't taken responsibility for it. If it was a ballistic missile attack, as some reports say, it seems that the Houthis would be the ones behind it. I wouldn't be that surprised if it was the Houthis. It's not like these are great people who don't do borderline terrorist things like bombing airports, especially when the Saudis have spent the past 5 years bombing their airport. At the same time, it's a horrific attack since it killed 25. I think a lot of those are civilians. I suppose it's also possible, there's factions of Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Al Qaeda, not the Islamic State faction that exists in Yemen. There is separatist groups in Aden who have long been opposed to the Saudi government. So it's not impossible that if this was some kind of bomb that actually just exploded at the airport, that there's other groups that could be behind it. But if it was the Houthis, I'm not 100%. I wouldn't be surprised by that. Also, doesn't justify the U.S. staying involved in the war, but that's likely the spin that we'll see on it. In response, the Saudis bombed the capital city of Sana'a 15 times, including the airport. It's interesting that one of these will sometimes get labeled a terrorist attack, and that'll be the Houthi attack on the Aden airport, but the Saudi attack on the Sana'a airport, which has been bombed dozens, if not over 100 times since this conflict started over 6 years ago, that never gets reported as a terrorist attack. Hell, when the Saudis blew up a school bus full of 40 plus children, that wasn't even identified as a terrorist attack. That was just, oh, we made a mistake. The Houthis are trying to transport weapons, kind of thing. Let's see. I think that's all I have on the Saudi, the attack on the Aden airport, and then the Saudi response. The last story I have here is from NPR, and it's okay. The reporting here isn't great. It doesn't do enough to tie the U.S. role in this war in, but it does go through and explain what's happening in Yemen. They describe this couple who, they changed the name of, but in the story they say Mohammed Youssef, and I guess his wife. They have a 1-year-old son who only weighs 6 pounds, and he's in his 5th day of treatment for acute malnutrition. They have doctors in the area saying that 1 in 5 Yemeni children are suffering from acute malnutrition. So again, they have this 6-year-old baby that's 1 year old. Not a baby was born at 6 pounds, but this baby weighs 6 pounds at 1 year old. This couple has already lost 2 other children to starvation. It's this is something that I've been talking about on this show and people within the anti-war movement. Certainly a huge topic on antiwar.com for, again, the past 5 to 6 years has been the fact that the Saudi war on Yemen is going to create these conditions. And they do say in here that it is in part the 3-year-old Saudi blockade on Yemen that's causing such a delay in basic necessities like food getting into the country. They could go into a lot more detail about the size, not a lot of medical supplies and stuff like that, but at least they do touch on the subject of the Saudi blockade, and they do point to the war as being the problem. They call it a civil war, which I think is a little bit of an issue for Yemen because It's really the Houthis against the Saudis, and the Saudis include the Emiratis, the Americans, and the UK, especially, that all make this war possible. I think it would require really all four of those countries to wage the war in the way they have, and that includes the blockade. And throughout the Obama and Trump presidencies, we've been waging this war and just murdering children upon children upon children. Who knows, how many, or if they'll ever really be able to count. And if it matters, if it's 100,000 or 200,000 children, but the fact that that many children at least are just not being able to eat until they drop dead. Their whole existence is being hungry for food, and then dying at the age of 1, 2, 3, or 4, something like that, is what's going on in Yemen. And hell, even if you survive, you're a 12-year-old, you got a little bit of food in your belly, you're going on a field trip, and the Saudis blow up your bus. And so, those are the conditions in Yemen. We've allowed this to happen for another year. It's, of all the horrific things that people point to about 2020, they'll never mention that, an entire country full of people just kind of shrugged while their government continued to wage this war in Yemen, even when it's entered the public consciousness a little bit in this past year. More so, Trump has had to override vetoes to continue this war, to continue these arms sales, and yet, people are never really upset or in the streets about this at all, even though it's costing the taxpayers money. All right. Before I wrap up here, I have a couple more stories. This one is the U.S. deploys B-52 bombers to the Middle East in a message to Iran. This is really what I thought 2020 was going to be about, had you asked me in January of 2020. The U.S. and potential conflict with Iran. Of course, the U.S. assassinated General Qasem Soleimani at the beginning of the year, and Iran responded by carrying out a missile attack on an Iraqi base that housed U.S. soldiers, not killing any soldiers, and telegraphing the attack, but nonetheless carrying out an attack on a base that housed U.S. soldiers was a definite escalation in where the U.S. and Iranian tensions have been. So these two B-52s take off from North Dakota, fly to the Middle East, and then back to North Dakota. A 30-hour mission. Who knows how many millions of dollars that this cost the U.S. taxpayer. But they say it's a threat to Iran to let the Iranians know that anytime we want it, we could drop massive bombs on their country and completely wreck it. To kind of, just let them know that we view them as, I guess, ants who are able to be killed anytime we feel like knocking over an anthill. Of course, there are the think tanks that support this kind of policy. The weapons makers support this kind of policy. The military, all the war hawks support this kind of policy. But for the Americans, it doesn't do anything for us. It doesn't make us safer. It only provokes Iran more to, probably build, more bombs to our missiles and stuff like that, to feel like they need to secure their country. And I'm not saying that they're going to like build nuclear bombs or missiles that could hit the US, but they're going to look to develop weapons that could strike US assets in the region should they ever feel like their country was about to be attacked. Last story I have here is just a giveaway. It's crazy. The U.S. sends, I think, 30 armored vehicles to the Iraqi military. I'm trying to do this fast because my allergies are really kicking in. Another 30 armored vehicles is going to cost American taxpayers a few $100,000 probably, and who knows how much else to ship them over there. They pretend like there's no money for certain things, and it's a huge debate to send American people a few $1,000s or something like that. But whenever it comes to passing the military bills and allowing, insane giveaways like this, there's never any real question to it, especially, among the mainstream. So that's that's the situation here. Hopefully we could continue to agitate and stop these giveaways, stop getting involved in other countries like Iraq, stop carrying out provocative actions against Iran. stop contributing to the genocide in Yemen, stop, carrying out these provocative actions with China, and realize that, we keep our money here at home. It doesn't have to be, spent on welfare or anything like that. It could go to tax breaks, lower taxes. It could go to paying down debt, or, just reducing the government budget. Hell, the government budget should be about zero or as close to that as we possibly get. And so all of this just adds to mammoth of the U.S. government. As I said in the beginning, I think 2021 will be an exciting year for the show. I think the U.S. government and the mainstream media are going to continue to expose themselves as our enemies, and I'll continue to talk about it and explain it, break it down, and I'll be back with more shows next week. Thanks, everyone.